Hello there. It's 11 o'clock. I think we're good to get going. So, my name's Quentin Russell. I am the content marketing specialist here at Doc365. And today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about how Office 365 can solve some common contract management problems. So, one second. Yep, perfect. All right. So, just to go over what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, we're going to be talking about who we are, just to let you know that we know what we're talking about, establish some credentials, let you know that we're not just kind of shouting into the void about things we don't know about. After that, we'll, to establish some common definitions, we'll go over the basics of contract management, basically what goes on during that process. And then after that, we'll go into some common contract management problems. So things that come up throughout the process as described earlier in the webinar. And after that, we're going to take a look at how you can use Office 365 to solve some of the more common contract management problems. After that, at the very end, we'll be doing a question and answer session where you'll be able to ask us different questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Now, we're going to handle that in the way that if you have a question during the webinar, feel free to type it out in the chat. And then once we get to the end, I'll go through those questions chronologically. And then if anyone else has any other questions, I will answer them during that time. With that said, I think we're good to just jump in. So let's do that. So who are we? Well, we're Doc365. We're a company located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have over 18 years of experience working with SharePoint to deliver exceptional productivity solutions. And we've worked with a wide range of companies in a variety of industries to implement a diverse array of SharePoint productivity tools. So these include intranet portals, contract management systems, CRM solutions, and more. With that said, our main goal is to really help companies reshape the way they work, break down knowledge silos, and get the most out of their Office 365 investment, because that's what we do. All of our different software solutions are built out on a company's Office 365 and SharePoint Online tenant. So that means that all of the information in there is yours. We don't touch it. We don't mess with it. And at the end of the day, you can have full control over everything in the system. We just kind of help you skip from entry-level SharePoint to having full mastery and control of your environment. With that said, let's jump into the webinar. So first of all, what is contract management? It seems like a simple question, but there's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of different people have a different perspective on what contract management is. So I figured this way it's easiest to get a set of operational definitions that we can use as we go throughout the webinar. So in this case, contract management is the process of managing contract creation, execution, and analysis to ensure optimal financial and operational performance while reducing risk. Essentially, there are 7 overall stages of the process that a contract moves as it goes through its life cycle. Basically, other terms for contract management include contract life cycle management, CLM, CM, any kind of variation on that. If anyone ever talks to you about that, just know that they're just talking about contract management. There's a lot of buzzwords that go into that, but it's essentially building the contract, editing it, executing it, finalizing the terms, and then moving on with it from there. But we'll kind of get into the specifics of that as we kind of talk about the different stages of contract management. The 7 main stages are as follows. You have the planning stage, the drafting stage, the approval stage, negotiation, signing, adding amendments, and then the actual management stage. Now, technically, all of this is contract management, but the actual management stage is less the actual building of the contract and more the execution of it once all of the details have been finalized. So, talking about the planning stage, this is essentially identifying a need in your organization. So in this case, it could be a situation where you have a customer coming in who is requesting a service from you. In this case, they have a need for a formal agreement to, for you to deliver X amount of things and for them to deliver Y amount of dollars. Could be a situation with a vendor where you don't want the terms of your negotiation to, reach the public light. In that case, you have a need for like a non-disclosure agreement. So once you've identified that need, it's time to establish your goals, set expectations, and define your risks. So this is essentially gathering all of the information related to this situation, figuring out what general terms and kind of feeling out the scope of what the contract is going to need to entail. It's essentially taking all of these together, compiling them in a way that makes it so that they're understandable by the person who's going to be compiling the contract, and then ensuring that both parties, both you and the person that you're working with, agree with this general scope. This is also called essentially the contract intake process. So it's essentially gathering the terms, someone submitting a contract request and saying, hey, I need to have a contract like this with these terms in order for us to continue to work with these people for this reason. It's not the most important step, but it is one of the most important steps, mostly because this is going to set the stage for everything that goes on with that actual contract's life cycle going forward. So the more preparation you can do here, the more planning you can do, the better. But once you've kind of got the planning stage completed, it's time to move on to the drafting stage. So this is where the contract's put together. So this generally involves consulting with an in-house counsel or an attorney to kind of iron out the details of a contract as compiled by the planning stage. Generally, a lot of companies have made the switch to using pre-made contract templates. So essentially, instead of having to make a new copy every time, they instead have to just go into the template, make a copy, deposit the new information, and go from there. Not all companies are using these. Some are still using the, typing it out by scratch, but that's rare, far between, and generally reserved for companies that can afford to have an in-house counsel at all times. Generally, it is just building from that template, plugging and playing, going from there. And from there, you're basically just adding clauses, changing some specific wording. But ultimately, for most companies, they're not going to deviate too far from their draft. And this is generally more a stage of being careful and watching out for any mistakes in copying, making sure you're working from the right document, as opposed to any sort of information gathering. Once you've drafted the contract, though, it's time to move on to the approval stage. So this is not as important of a stage, but it's essentially when the contract isn't quite finalized, but it is approved internally. So you've gone to your supervisors and you've said, yes, we need this contract. And they say, okay, what are the terms? What do you need? Okay, you have that. It's good to go. I sign off on this. I'm going to send it up to the next person. So this generally involves an approval workflow where it goes from person to person to person. And this is kind of where some mistakes can pop up. So essentially, the approval email doesn't go to the right person. It sits in someone's email inbox. It can kind of be an issue, especially because the no to approval processes are going to look the same, because it really depends on your company's internal makeup, what regulations you're bound to, how things need to work, that sort of thing. So really just making sure that you're kind of on top of that, cognizant of your organization's needs. That's kind of how you should be approaching the approval stage. But from there, after the approval stage, you have the negotiation stage. So basically, once both parties have internally improved the contract itself, what's kind of going to go into it, it's time for the actual negotiation stage where the specific terms are ironed out. So this is less the actual what goes in the contract and more how it's phrased, the specific wording, any liability issues, who's responsible for what in case of XYZ things. Generally, this involves a lot of the contract being sent back and forth. You have redlining as the companies go back and forth on what the specific wording should be. And this is where you can kind of run into issues with multiple versions of a document popping up and not meshing completely, because one company's working from this version, another company's working from that version. But we'll kind of delve more into that later. But once you've kind of finalized the terms of the contract, it's time to send it out for signature. So this is essentially where everything's agreed upon, everything is ironed out, and now it's time to make it official, execute it, and move from there. The signature process generally happens with either a physical document faxed back and forth, or through the use of e-signature solutions, more commonly e-signature solutions these days. So think like DocuSign, Adobe Sign, Certify, these different companies that allow you to just upload the document, add the signature fields, go from there. However, once a contract has been signed, it's not necessarily the final process and it's not in its final iteration. This is where you get to the amendment stage. So this is essentially where you generate post-signature revisions and amendments, generally in response to unforeseen situations that can cause an impact in the overall performance of the contract and its life cycle. Generally you're not going to see major revisions to a contract in this stage, but it does come down to wording, pricing, anticipating any, major issues that might come up later down the line in response to an issue that already came up. And this can generally happen well into a contract's life cycle. It can go like, it isn't just a situation where it's like the first couple months of a contract. Even if you're only a month or two out from renewal, at that point in time, if a major issue does come up that wasn't accounted for, there's no one's quite sure what's going on, you can still add an amendment at that stage. It's not as common, but it can still happen at any point in a contract's life cycle. And then from there, we move on to the last stage, the actual management stage. So I will say the management stage and the amendment stage do tend to happen pretty simultaneously, because basically throughout the management process, you're essentially conducting regular audits, tracking obligations and deadlines, reviewing the different obligations, and keeping up with important dates in a contract's life cycle. And through that, that's where you're going to find those unintentional, mistakes, those issues that might pop up. And from there, you go back and you say, hey, this is a thing, this is a problem, we need to adjust the contract to accommodate this. And from there, you can actually go and make those changes and everything. So like I said, the two tend to happen simultaneously. Management is generally where the bulk of contract management takes place. Generally, the first parts of the process, everything before amendments, usually takes place in anywhere from a 1 week to 6 month to 1 year period. But then after that, and you're in the actual term of the contract, this can kind of depend. So if you're in a 1 to 2 year contract, that's where the bulk of this is. There's not as much work in this stage, but it is just regularly going back, checking up on the terms of the contract and making sure that everything's up to date and that your company is staying compliant with the terms and that the other company is staying compliant with the terms of the contract. So now that we have a operational set of definitions for contract management and what the different stages look like, let's take a look at some of the most common contract management problems. So we've identified 4 major issues that have come up that a lot of companies have discussed with us. So these are unintentional renewals, having a lack of visibility of your contracts, struggling with contract versions, and then workflow and process breaks. We kind of came to this after talking. So we've talked to a lot of companies about their contract management processes, how they're operating things, how they're running things. And these have just been a consistent narrative that have come up over time as people talk to us about their maybe not broken contract management processes, but definitely their interrupted and mismanaged processes. So let's kind of jump into these. So the first one is unintentional renewals, and this kind of overlaps with also the tracking of expiration dates. But these days, a lot of companies tend to have what's called an evergreen clause in their contracts. This is especially the case with service providers. So think Microsoft, Adobe, Google, where essentially if you are using their service, you only have a certain period where you are able to cancel the contract. And this is generally like 30 days to 10 days out from the actual expiration date of the contract. And if you do not use that termination date, if you do not use that window, the contract will automatically roll over, which can be a major issue, especially if you're not fully using the service or the service is not up to par for your needs. Like a good example of this is Adobe with Photoshop. There are other photo editing software out there, but a lot of companies, when they're first starting out or just getting into marketing or just getting into photo editing, tend to go with Photoshop because it is the premier name. However, the big issue with Photoshop is that it's clunky, difficult to use, and there's a reason they offer full-on college courses just to use the platform. And so a lot of companies will say, well, we're not really using Photoshop. We don't want to use it. But unfortunately, Adobe and all of their clauses have a thing where where someone only has like a 1 to 2 day period where they can actually cancel their Photoshop subscription. Well, if you're not tracking that date, if you're not keeping notified and up to date on that, you're going to run into a situation where you miss that date completely, and then you have to pay a crap ton of money in order to cut your Adobe subscription. And realistically, you shouldn't have to do that, especially because during that time, you're not fully using your Photoshop subscription. So that's just a major business expense that you didn't have to have. So if you were able to track your expirations, track these things, make them visible, and get notifications out when that was going to happen, you could definitely avoid a lot of this and move on from that. But we'll kind of talk about how to get around that later. But that can be a major issue and a major cost point and pain point for your company. But moving on from that, we have a lack of visibility. So this is an issue where, especially as you build and generate more contracts throughout your company's lifespan, a lot of companies get started with their contracts, keeping them in like a spreadsheet or a share drive, because realistically per year, they're only making 20 to 30. However, as they grow, as they expand, they move to the point where they're managing 50, 60, 70, and then 100, 200, 300. And that's the point in time where the spreadsheet or the share drive really isn't going to cut it, because you're not staying up to date with everything. Things are going to get lost. Mistakes are going to get made. And so you're going to run into an issue where you're just losing contracts. And one of the easiest ways to break compliance, one of the easiest ways to mess up something in a contract is if you have no idea what's up with the contract. So that runs into an issue where, you've lost a contract, you can't find it, and then you go to do something and you've broken the terms of the contract. Well, at best, you're going to face a decent fine or fee due to the terms of the contract from the other company you're working with. At worst, you're facing a multi-thousand to $1 million lawsuit, depending on the terms and scope of the contract. So that's why it's super important that you keep up to date with all of your different contracts and make sure that they're completely visible. But a lot of companies aren't able to do that because they're just storing everything in a spreadsheet or a share drive. So that definitely, much like with, not missing renewal dates and everything, that can cause a major issue for your bottom line and for your company's reputation. But moving on from that, you also have an issue with contract versioning. One consistent narrative we have come up over and over again is companies telling us that you have people who are working with a contract, but they're working from multiple different versions of it. So like Bill's working on, version X, Ted's working on version Z, and Mary's working from version Y. And all of them are slightly differently worded. And so you run into a situation where they go to sign off on it, send it out to each other, and they're incredibly confused because it's not the version that they were working with. And so then they have to spend time trying to reconcile the differences between the three contracts to eventually get to the point where they should have been initially, which is working from that same contract, which is, either X, Y, or Z, depending on which is the most proper version. And this can also be a major issue when it comes to contract templating. So building the contract initially, if you're a company that stores your contracts in a share drive, a major thing that can tend to happen is, instead of having to go to that share drive every time, an employee just downloads the contract template to keep on their computer. Well, they're only going to work from that template on their OneDrive or on their computer, and they're going to completely miss whenever legal updates the contract template in there. They're going to miss out on the latest clauses, the latest something that needs to be in there. And then, they go to send their contract to legal. Legal says, okay, well, where was this? Why isn't this in there? So then they have to go and they have to resolve that issue, reconcile that with the updated template versus the previous one. And even then, there's no guarantee that that user is then going to go back and download that latest version. Because if they're just having to go and download that latest version, well, you're going to run into that same issue in another couple months once the contract template's updated again, and that user hasn't gone back and downloaded the latest version. That is a consistent narrative we've seen pop up over and over again, and it can cause major issues. mostly because it just takes a ton of time to reconcile everything. So and that's just something that's going to cost your company time. And at the end of the day, it's going to cost your company money because you're not going to be able to work on more profitable aspects of the business. And instead you're having to account for human error and make up for this, relatively minor problem, but just one that keeps appearing. And then from there, and then like the final major one is workflow and process breaks. Basically, a lot of people don't exactly know where they stand in the contract management process. They'll create a contract, they'll go to submit it to someone, but they don't know who to submit it to. Or once the contract's been submitted and reviewed, that person doesn't know who to send it off to. Or you run into a situation where there's no sort of impetus or mechanism in place for the person who, for each stage of the process to incentivize the person to do it in a timely manner. So you run into a situation where a contract needs to be signed off on by upper management, but upper management doesn't have any way to get notified to either do it or be anything to kind of kick them in the pants or hold them accountable when they haven't signed off on it. And that can be a major problem because that's going to delay your contracts. And ultimately, there are some situations where, maybe a contract being delayed by a month isn't a major issue. But if it's something like a sale, if you're purchasing something for the next quarter and you miss something and it falls out of a certain period where you're able to use funds from a budget or something, well, that's going to have a major impact on your ability to do business. It's going to keep you from being able to jump in and get started on what that's supposed to be done, especially if it's a business critical task or contract. So having these breaks in the workflow, not having a real way to move everything along without having someone to hold them accountable is going to cause major problems and slow down your business. And again, when your business is slowed down, that can be a major problem for your bottom line. So with that kind of identified and tracked and everything, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you guys a advanced version of how you can use Office 365 to resolve these contract management problems that I talked about. Now, the thing is that I'm going to be showing you an advanced version. This is our contract management system that we've built out and customized. But as we talk about it, I'm going to talk about the mechanics behind it and how you can kind of use a simpler version in your day-to-day SharePoint use and Office 365 use. So right here is the dashboard of our contract management system. And what it does is it shows you a broad overview of what's going on with the different contracts in your organization. Now, the thing is that this is a site and everything. And what we've done is we've modified the UI, but kept the actual functions the same. So one of the big things that we talked about throughout the webinar is like the first major problem is having an issue with the way that your contracts are renewed. So basically missing renewals, missing expirations, not being able to have that information the way where it needs to be. Well, with our contract management system, we've set it up on the dashboard so that you are notified of the different contracts when they're going to expire. So essentially by 30, 60, and 90 days, because we've set up a timer in here that essentially says when a contract is a certain number of days out from its expiration date, send a notification of that it's going to expire. So the way this works is that what we've done is, so we have the different contracts stored in a list in SharePoint Online. So you can jump out to the actual, contract container itself. But in this instance, what it is we've attached a bit of metadata that says it's going to expire on this date. Then what we've done is we've configured a notification in SharePoint Online that says, hey, we would like you to send an email out to the person responsible for managing this contract that at X number of days out from this date that the contract is going to expire and they have X number of days that they can do this. And that is a very simple workflow that you can set up. Basically, you just build the metadata tag and then you go into Power Automate and then you build out that workflow. If you have any questions about building out workflows, we've actually done a previous webinar on that as part of our SharePoint Basics series. SharePoint Basic Series workflows. You can find that on our website, www.mydoc365.com/webinars. If you scroll down, you can access that for free, but essentially you just build out a small little workflow that just says, hey, notify me 30, 60, 10 days out. And that's a really simple way to make sure that you're not missing your expiration dates. Because as opposed to having to go in, check it every time, put something on your calendar manually, the system just does it for you. SharePoint will just do it for you. And that's a really simple way to do that. Now, our system makes it so that you can kind of skip that process and jump right to just having the workflow made for you, because out of the box by default, it does come with that 30, 60, 90. And then you would just come in here and say, hey, I would like to be notified this many days out because of this. And then it'll send you that notification, build that workflow behind the scenes without you having to really do a lot of Power Automate there. But moving on from that, going to the next big problem that we kind of talked about, which is a lack of visibility. So essentially with that lack of visibility and everything, a lot of times it's because you don't really have a good way to organize the contracts. So in this case, what we've done is we've built it, like you said, like I kind of said, we've built it out into a list, but we set it up so that each contract is owned by a specific person. So they can just filter out that information and they can say, okay, well, I just want to see all of the contracts that are owned by me, or I want to see all of the contracts that are, this status, that are currently in review, approved. Well, by default on the dashboard, we have that set up so you can go check that. But a really simple way you can do that is, again, apply a metadata tag that just says, hey, this person is the owner, so that they can then go into that list view and say, hey, I just want to see my contracts. And then you would use like a series of different metadata tags in that list to say, hey, I want to see which contracts are, basically this contract is currently in draft. This contract is currently approved. This contract is currently fully executed. It's currently waiting for a signature. So you build out those different metadata tags, apply them to a document in that list, and then you can go through, sort out that information, and increase the level of visibility. So instead of running to a situation where you're just having to dig through different folders to find everything, it's all just here in the system. And the thing is that while that's a situation where you're kind of having to set all of that manually up by hand, our system kind of lets you skip all of that, get to the point where you are setting up the fields, and a lot of them are already set up by default. So you can just plug and play instead of having to, spend a couple months building everything out. But from there, the next big issue that we kind of talked about was versioning. So making sure that everyone's working from the right version, including the contract template. Well, with our system, you can build full contracts from template. And so essentially, like right here, instead of having to, pull out a contract, make a copy, deposit all the information in, our system allows you to just come in here, set up the contract template, put all of the different fields in there, and then someone just fills out a form, and then it auto-populates into that contract. So I'll just kind of show you a little bit of how that works. And this, I will say, this is a little more difficult to do with just building it yourself. The way that I would really recommend doing this would be to basically have the central template that everyone uses, and make it so that instead of having multiple people be able to generate contracts, use a Microsoft form to build a request form. So if someone wants to create a new contract, they submit that request form, and then from there, whoever is responsible for the actual contracts in your organization can take that, populate that into a contract template, so that they're the only one kind of touching that, instead of having multiple people touch that. Now, that is a bit more of a time-consuming process. An easier way to do that would be to just, say, for instance, use our system, which involves a series of different workflows where you can, update a form, and then everything from that form will be mapped to the different fields in a contract, and then everything will just be automatically populated in, so that you're still just working from the one template, but multiple people can generate contracts without having to have it be a major issue. And then the last kind of major problem that we talked about was having an issue with people essentially, workflow process breaks, essentially people not doing what they're supposed to be doing, not knowing what they're supposed to be doing. Well, an easy way to do that would be to use something like Planner to assign out a list of tasks, assign those out to different people, and then say, hey, I've completed this, I've completed this. That way you kind of have an accountability system. Well, another way you could do it is you could build out a long workflow that essentially has the task for someone. Once they've completed that task, it assigns it out to the next person and then moves it from stage to stage to stage. But that can definitely take some time. But that is how our system works. So essentially, in this case, we built out a series of different workflow templates that people can use, and then users can also build these out themselves. And so what they would do is they have these templates, they choose which one they want, and then they can just fire it off. And then once that's done, it'll update the status of the contract itself, and then send notifications out to these people that they're supposed to do this without having to actually go into Power Automate and build all of this out yourself. Now, also with that, you can also set it up in our system personally to also automatically apply these workflows given certain conditions are met. So you don't even have to do the part where you manually fire off the workflow. But that's super advanced. I don't think you're going to be able to build that out on your own time, but it is something that you could consider doing with SharePoint, which is just a simple approval workflow. And again, if you have any questions about workflows, we've done a full webinar on that. I've already told you how you can access that. So yeah, that's just a simple overview of how you can kind of use SharePoint to solve some of the more common contract management problems that we've talked about. Now, the thing is that my serious recommendation is that while you could take the time to build all this out yourself, it's going to take you time. It's going to take you time, and you're going to run into a situation where you hit a brick wall because you just kind of don't know where to go. And that's honestly why I recommend going to a SharePoint solution provider like us or any other of the other providers out there, because we help you skip a lot of that downtime. And instead of taking 6 months to deploy a automated version for yourself, it takes 3 to 4 weeks to get everything done, deployed, set up, and you're ready to go. And everything will have been set up professionally without any major issues. And then instead of having to maintain it yourselves, you have a company that's going to maintain it for you over time. And sure, you could hire an internal SharePoint person for $30,000 to $60,000 a year, but realistically, solutions like ours are going to run you less than $15,000 a year. So that definitely is something to consider. But I think that's pretty much everything for our webinar today. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. While we kind of wait for questions to come in, I do want to talk about some of the upcoming webinars that we have. So next week on May 25th, we'll be talking about how Office 365, oh, nope, we're not going to be talking about that. That was a mistake. We are actually going to be talking about Office 365 adoption challenges and how to overcome them. So essentially ways that you can spread up people beginning to use Office 365 in your organization. After that, on June 1st, we'll probably be talking about some other contract related topic. That's to be determined. But then after that, on June 8th, we'll be doing the next part of our SharePoint Basics series, this time on external sharing. And then on June 15th, we'll be taking a look at what to look for in a contract management system provider. If there are no questions, I think we're done for the day. So if you guys have any questions after the fact, or you want to schedule a demo with us, you can either go to our website and sign up for a free demo there, mydoc365.com. Just go click free demo in the right-hand corner. Or you can call us at 904-309-9970, or you can reach out at info@mydoc365.com. Or if you have any personal questions, feel free to reach out to me at qrussell@mydoc365.com. If you like our content and the webinars that we provide, feel free to like us on LinkedIn at Doc365. And if there's nothing else, this has been Quentin Russell with Doc365, telling you how Office 365 can help you solve common contract management issues. Thank you very much, and have a great day.